Hello, brothers and sisters. Raven here. This week, I want to talk about the two words that I would say are the best two for giving a general image of what Homestead Heritage is: hypocrisy, brainwashing. And I want to talk about these two together because they go hand in hand, one causing the other. Hypocrisy can come about for many reasons. One can be pretty simple. People teach you something, teach you one thing, and they themselves have trouble practicing it. Sort of the remove the plank from your own eye kind of idea. However, that I wouldn't say is real hypocrisy. Because in that case, it's not that they just willingly practice it or that they really push it. They really are fighting it. They really are trying to go against it. So I wouldn't really consider that the same as what hypocrisy is. Because real hypocrisy is practicing. Do you practice what you preach? Practice is different from stumbling. And when you do it this way, it's all by words. It's all by what you're speaking. Because you can't do it by example if you're going to be a hypocrite. Everything you do is going to be the other way around. So it's not by example. It's all by words, by what you speak. Which is why it has to be, in a sense, brainwashing. If people are following you and they see you practice something, logically, they'll start doing the same. They'll start going along with it. However, if you're practicing differently and you have to constantly tell them to do it, practically force them to do it, that's going to lead in the direction of brainwashing. That's what it does. In the same way, when you're brainwashing somebody, you're forcing them to believe something. You're making them think they believe what they don't necessarily believe. Or making them practice something, though they don't understand it and think they do. When you're doing this, when you're telling them this stuff, and you have to really shove it down their throat, really force them to believe it, how can you truly believe it? Stop and think about it. How? If you feel like the only way to get them to believe it is to force them to believe it, how can you be believing it? Because that's not belief. It's either them believing you or their fear of you. And if you think you have to force them to believe it, why would that be? Unless you're struggling to believe it. You have to force yourself to believe it. Sometimes when this happens, it's simply the person who's brainwashing others trying to get themselves to believe it by using others. That's hypocrisy. That's why these two go hand in hand. They are very, very much related. They're two different things, but it's hard to have one without the other. When somebody is brainwashing others, you can't trust that they truly believe it. Some cases, maybe they do, but not always. Because it usually happens for a couple of reasons. Either one, they find it's the only way to get people to believe it. People just don't want to accept it. But if you're going to see that and not start to see the issues and just keep pushing it to the point of brainwashing, means you've already brainwashed yourself because you're not thinking. You're not pondering. You're not stopping to consider it. You've already washed all thought out of your brain. All you have left are these beliefs that you're going to force. Another reason would be because you don't believe it at all. You really don't, but you want others to. Because of maybe the power it gives you, the money it gives you, etc. And in that case, since you don't believe it, you're not going to be able to logically convince them of it. You're not going to be able to show a real passion for it. Instead, you have to force it on them. You have to make sure they don't use their heads. You make sure they're not really thinking about it reasonably. You have to force it. The hypocrisy of it is disgusting. One thing I mentioned on a recent video, if you've been watching the ones I'm doing on Devil's Dictionary, there's one I've recently recorded that is going to go up this week. It is the last of the whole series on Devil's Dictionary. It is the definition of the word wisdom. As I do mention in passing on this video, the definitions he gives are the very definitions that he practices. You think about the way it is a lot of times in school with bullies. It's how it works. I mentioned in the video, that's the way he talks. That's the way he acts. Within these corrupt definitions he gives, so often he does it in a very immature manner. He acts like a bully. Why? That's the way it works. 9 out of 10, when somebody's picking on somebody else for something, it's because they have that same issue. It's because they have to remove the plank out of their own eye. I remember back in elementary school, went to a summer camp one time. We were in a dark room and this girl showed a bright flashlight on my face and just started mocking me for having a ton of zits. Next day I see her and she had twice as many. That's what happens. That's the way it works. That's what they do. So often, the people who start places like this, start these cults, have lots of things they don't want to have to admit to. They don't want to have to face. So to hide it, they make everybody else look worse. They want this community to be so perfect by making the rest of the world look so terrible. But not just the world, the rest of the Christian community. That's where the hypocrisy comes from. It's a way of hiding their own issues, their own problems. And by that, they're brainwashing themselves. They're forcing themselves to believe something that they know isn't true, just as they force others. And this is central. These two things come out as these central words that describe Homestead Heritage to me, because everything comes out of this. Their teachings of the Trinity, of how it's false, how it has to be this oneness doctrine, how it's just polytheism for it to be the Trinity. That itself is hypocritical brainwashing. Why? Well, look at what they're doing. They're saying the entirety of the body is Christ, is one, is this singular entity. That is the epitome of hypocrisy, because they're saying God can't be three in one, but men can be many, many, many in one. You're saying there's something men can do that God can't do. So hypocritical and so brainwashing. Look at the way they deal with identity coming out of that. Get rid of yourself. You have to become this body. You have to accept this identity of Christ, not your own. And yet, as soon as they started talking about leadership in some of their messages during the conference, then all of a sudden identity did matter. Then all of a sudden you did have this single identity of you, because that's what the leaders get. Again, hypocrisy by what they brainwash others with. And that is real brainwashing, because then you're not just washing out thoughts. You're washing out that person themselves. You're washing out any identity they have. And you're replacing it with one that is not theirs, but yours. That's hypocrisy. That's brainwashing. Consider what they do with faith, how they make faith the same as faithful. Do you realize how ironic that is? How hypocritical that change in definition in and of itself is. By changing the meaning of the word, faith, you're showing you have no faith in what was written. And you're being unfaithful to his word. Just changing that word itself is hypocrisy. And it's out of that you lose all faith in Jesus and what he did, and put all faith in what you do, in who you become as this new identity of Christ. That's all you see. There's more and more and more. All of their teachings, every last one of them, they come together. Hypocrisy, brainwashing. It's something that really has me stirred up right now, because this is what makes it so hard to reach those inside, to reach those captive to it, to reach those who have been brainwashed by this hypocrisy, because they're taught how not to think. It's extremely difficult to get them to think about it, because they have been made to believe every single lie. They have become blind to lies in general. It's this weird feeling we have. It's something that just generally happens. When somebody says they're not lying, it's so hard sometimes not to just trust that. We have this weird tendency to think, because they're willing to say that, how could they be lying? Because we don't like to admit just how much sin and evil we have inside us. And why? Because that's what this all started with. Every bit of what is wrong with this world, all of the evil in it, all of the deceit, all of the death, all of the pain, it all came out of this very same thing: hypocrisy and brainwashing. Because that's what the serpent gave us. That's what Satan brought. By muddying up what was the truth and what was a lie. Because so much of what he said had a sense of truth to it, and yet it was so deceiving. And what happened? We were given a sin nature. We were brainwashed. And what led to that? Satan himself sought to be equal to God. And so what did he tempt Adam and Eve with? That very thing. This wasn't just deceit. This was hypocritical brainwashing. This was a form of deceit that knows how to really make it so that you believe what they want you to believe. People fall for this stuff because we've all fallen for it. People get trapped within these cults because that's what this world has become. We are all stuck under the brainwashing of our sin nature. We are all trapped within that. Cults simply take that and use it to their own advantage. They simply take that familiarity of brainwashing, the familiarity of hypocrisy, and take it to an extreme to get full control. That's what Homestead Heritage does. Adam and Eve ate of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. Cults, Homestead Heritage, even our society in general lately, in more modern days, it's all about giving you a whole new sort of quote-unquote knowledge of good and evil. That's the way it works. That's what it is. That's the way it's been since the start. And it goes directly against God's will. Because from the very start, He gave us a free will. It was a free will. Satan came to make it captive to that sin nature. Satan hates freedom. Cults hate freedom. They want control. And that's the easiest way to get it. It's already there. That sin nature is there. Our free will has already been tainted by it. Brainwashing is already taken captive. It doesn't take much more to brainwash further, if you know how to do it right. And they have definitely been trained by the best of the best. A while back, I did a video about Job. It is something that I really love. I love the book of Job, and it's something that Blair took and twisted. And the way he talked about Satan was very backwards. He made Satan into this figure who was going to try to trick God, confuse God. However, Satan knew he couldn't make God look dumb. He couldn't show God as wrong. No, but he could show the weakness of Job. And he used that very thing. Brainwashing. First, he tried to actually have things happen that would make Job go the other way. It didn't work. What did? Job's friends. The ones that kept pushing it the wrong way. That kept putting all that pressure on him the wrong direction. It was that brainwashing. That's what did it. Blair Adams didn't want you to see that. He didn't want you to look at that. He didn't want you to realize that just tempting wasn't what did it. Because he wants you to see it as though this was Satan's challenge against God, when really it was God's against Satan. It's like with Homestead. It's not because they really convince you to believe these things. It's because they use the community. They use these quote-unquote loving people. Then they're able to indoctrinate. Then they're able to force these beliefs on you, to trick you, deceive you. They're very clever how they go about this. Think about what happened with Satan when he tempted Adam and Eve. God had said it wasn't good for a man to be alone, so he made Eve. What did Satan do? He used Eve to trick Adam. Just as it had to be Job's friends to trick him. That's one thing to remember. It's one thing to keep in mind when we look at this. The real evil in this is that deceptive serpent, is Satan's methods, Satan's way of deceiving, Satan's way of brainwashing. And there's no one so hypocritical. It's why I'll both speak out against this in rage, in anger, and yet be motivated to, out of compassion, love, grief, because what I'm fighting against is both the deceiver and the lies that have brainwashed. We should never be putting our full faith into any particular leader or teacher other than Jesus Christ. Homestead wants to be able to claim They believe the same thing. Thus, they call themselves Christ. Hypocritical brainwashing. Think through it yourself. Even if you appreciate, admire, follow any kind of teacher or leader, never put your faith in them. Keep your faith in Him. I'll see you guys next time. God bless.